Hello everyone and welcome to a new video of Square Triangle Mouse. Today we're going to talk about the ancient cultures in Humankind, and we are making a tier list so you guys know which ones are good to pick, which ones are not so good, and which ones should be avoided like the plague. So today we are going to get right into the topic. We are going to start with the Assyrians. And the Assyrians are not going to get a very good score, they're going down here as mediocre. Now, I will point out that there is an exception to this rule. The Assyrians are actually quite alright if you're playing a speedrun, so if you want to win the game, for example, on standard speed in less than 100 turns. The Assyrians can be quite good for speedruns because of their legacy trait, which gives you +1 land movement speed on unit, which is really useful if you want to go very fast all the time, which you will want to do if you're going for a speedrun, of course. The Assyrian Raiders, not an awesome unit. You usually don't want a lot of cavalry in general in this game because it's very difficult to invade cities with cavalry, so that really limits how useful it can be. So I don't normally get much out of the Assyrian Raiders. The exception would be a speedrun, of course. The Dunu is not a great emblematic district. It's a garrison, essentially a better garrison, but we don't usually want to build a lot of garrisons. Again, the exception is a speedrun because you want to be able to spawn units anywhere, but on a normal game we are not going to be building a lot of these. +3 influence is not so much. The strength for adjacent units is not very useful in general. It counts as common quarter for some of the religious bonuses, but it's still not really good. So in general, I would say if you are not going for a speedrun, the Assyrians are mediocre. If you are going for a speedrun, however, you may want to get them. The only reason why I don't say they are awful when you are not going for a speedrun is because they are expansionist. And the thing is, in the ancient era, it's fairly easy to get the expansionist stars, and because you are going to get more fame value with them, I would say they are not awful, but that's really the only reason. We continue with Babylon, and I'm going to say that Babylon is an okay culture. They're not great, but you can play with them, it's fine. They're not terrible or anything. +2 science per research technologies and capital. It's not going to be so much, actually. By the time you have, let's say, 30 technologies researched, which is going to happen late in the game, there is only going to be 60 science in your capital, which is not so much science anyway. The unique unit is fine. It's anti-cavalry, which might be useful in the ancient era because the AI tends to put at least one horseman in their early armies. So having an anti-cavalry unit early on is not too bad. And finally we have the emblematic district, which is the astronomy house. You get more science per adjacent farmer's quarter, but the thing is, it's not usually very good to build farmer quarters in this game, especially if you are playing on high difficulties. I only play on Humankind difficulties, so I might be biased that way. But in general, you should be able to get food in other ways. You shouldn't need to waste production in farmer quarters. So that's my main problem with the astronomy house. Apart from that, +1 food and +1 science per researcher is not too bad, and getting scientific era stars is also not so difficult. So overall, not a terrible culture, but not a super strong one either. We continue with the Bantu, and the Bantu are going to be considered mediocre as well. Now, the main problem with the Bantu is the legacy trait. The legacy trait is just very bad. I don't know if it's the worst legacy trait in the entire game, but it might be. It gives you +2 influence per number of adjacent empires on every territory. The problem is you don't want to have a lot of adjacent empires. One of the best strategies in this game is just conquering your starting continent completely, then taking a couple of islands, and that should be enough to win every time. So you don't want to have a lot of guys in your borders. The AI in high difficulties especially is going to be very aggressive, and you don't want to have a lot of them as neighbors. So that's usually going to give you almost no influence at all, maybe a little bit of influence, but still not enough to be relevant in any way during the game. The emblematic districts is the Mupia Fields. It automatically upgrades regular outposts and gives you +10 food on any adjacent city. Now the problem is it happens in the ancient era, which means you are probably going to have only 2 cities adjacent to each Mupia field. Maybe 3 if you get lucky, if you plan ahead a lot and you have good territory for it. So it's going to be +10 food in at best 3 cities, and that's it. You're not going to want to keep this forever in your game. It's not going to be so beneficial anyway, because later in the game +10 food is not so much. So also a rather weak emblematic district for a culture that already had the worst legacy trait in this era. The emblematic unit is okay. I do like the Bagendi pioneers. You can get a lot of them by finding food throughout the map. You can use them to get more outposts, but you can also just use them to get more population in your cities. And because of that, they can be very useful. Overall, a very decent emblematic unit. Together with the expansionist trait, as we said before, it's easy to get expansionist era stars in the ancient era. So together with the expansionist trait, I would say the emblematic unit is the main reason why I don't consider the Bantu to be awful, but they are very weak. We are now going with the Caralans, and I'm going to say they are okay. Also a little bit situational, because they can be better, for example, in island maps, if you have a lot of small continents or something like that, or a map with many islands, let's say, you can end up getting more use for them. So basically what happens with these guys is that the emblematic unit is very weak. That's their main negative point. The healer is going to allow you to heal faster in enemy territory, but you usually don't need that. You usually move your units into enemy territory only to take enemy cities. You take them as quickly as possible, and then once you take them, the enemy territory is not enemy territory anymore. So you don't really have a lot of use for those healers. They are just very, very weak. The emblematic district is not great, but it's kind of interesting because it works a little bit like a hamlet. It allows you to construct new districts on adjacent tiles, and it comes a lot earlier than the hamlet. So as I said before, if you have a lot of islands in your map, this could be very helpful to basically build districts in all of the islands of the archipelago. It gives you also a little bit of faith per adjacent district, which isn't too bad. They are a builder culture. Again, it shouldn't be so hard to get the builder stars. And you get +1 food on farmer quarter per adjacent farmer quarter, +1 industry per adjacent maker quarter, and so on with each district. That's a very decent legacy trait, because you already want to do that. There is already a default infrastructure in this game which gives you that. So you're already going to want to have your market quarters adjacent to each other, your makers quarters adjacent to each other, your research quarters adjacent to each other. So, getting an extra bonus for doing something that you were already going to do anyway is always nice. So that's a pretty good legacy trait, I would say. If their emblematic unit wasn't so weak, I could say they could be one of the strongest cultures here, but unfortunately the healer is just rather useless. We are now finally getting into the strong ones. It's no surprise, I guess, to anyone that I'm going to put the Egyptians up here as overpowered. They are just really, really strong. Even after they've been nerfed a little bit, they are still super, super good. So their legacy trait is awesome, one of the best ones in the entire game, +1 industry on tile producing industry and -10% on district industry cost. That is just very, very good. I don't think I need to make my case here. I think we can all agree that it's just great. And the emblematic district is also very good, +3 industry, +1 influence, more industry per adjacent makers quarters. It's just really, really nice. You always want production in this game, so having a district that gives you so much production is very, very good. The emblematic unit comes a little bit late, but the thing with this unit is that it's still going to be useful in the classical era, because you can move, attack, and then move back. So it won't die so fast in the classical era because you can hide it after attacking. It has a very decent range. So overall, I would say it's still an okay unit. It's not so OP after the nerf because you need more resources to build it, but it's still a good unit. They didn't make it weak or anything like that. Overall, just a very good culture. I cannot find any weaknesses for the Egyptians. Another good culture is the Harappan culture. We are going to put it here as good, maybe not so super strong as the Egyptians, but still a good one. Basically, instead of having a lot of production like the Egyptians, they have a lot of food. And food is good, but it's not so good as production. That's why they are one step below. They get +1 food on tile producing food and +1 food on river. You are always going to want to get your cities around rivers because of the infrastructure that gives you bonuses on rivers. So that is something you already want to do, and you get an extra bonus for doing it if you are doing it with the Harappans, which is always good, as I said before. The emblematic unit is a nice one. The runner is basically a faster scout. It doesn't receive any penalties on forests, so it's just a really nice scout. You can explore the map in the ancient era very quickly with those guys, and you can get all of those nice ancient era curiosities very fast with the runners. Finally, the emblematic district is also nice. You get +3 food and another +2 per adjacent farmer quarter. Now, of course, as I said before with Babylon, you are not going to be wanting to build a lot of farmer quarters, but the canal network on its own gives you a nice amount of food, and it's also considered as a river, so you can basically create quote-unquote rivers in territories that don't have them, which is very nice. Overall, a good district, if not so extremely strong as the one the Egyptians have. And from some of our strongest cultures in the game, we go straight to the bottom with the Hittites, my least favorite culture in the ancient era. And because the ancient era is so important, I would say this is my least favorite culture in the entire game. To me, basically, if I want an extra challenge, I force myself to play with the Hittites and try to survive and try to still win in Humankind difficulty, which is not always an easy task. Basically, the problem with the Hittites, well, they have a bunch of problems, really. Let's go. Last for war, that's the legacy trait. +1 combat strength on unit, that's not too bad. But then you get +20 food, industry, money, and science on each own city per occupied city. The problem with this is that the occupied cities are not going to be occupied for very long. Usually you want to make the wars as quickly as possible, you want to conquer quickly and finish the war in 3 or 4 turns tops. So this is not going to last for so long, and even though it's stronger after they've been buffed, it's still not good enough to justify playing the Hittites. And why is it not enough? Well, the emblematic district is basically garbage. It's a regular outpost that gives you a little bit of money, which doesn't really count for much. Gives you more health regeneration, which, as I pointed out before with the unique unit of the Caralans, more health regeneration is not something you usually need in the game. So basically gives you a bunch of things that you probably don't need, and you don't want to keep those outposts for very long. So you're not going to keep this emblematic district for the late game. Overall, it's just a very weak district. And then the emblematic unit is a Gigir. It also comes very late in the ancient era, but unlike the Egyptian unit, this one is not going to still be useful in the classical era. It's a mounted unit, which is already handicapped because you cannot use it to take cities. You have to take down walls to enter cities with mounted units, which makes the whole siege just way too slow. So you're not going to be using them for conquest, and in the classical era, for example, if you have the Persians next to you, the immortals are going to destroy the Gigir, just destroy them like they were made out of paper. But really, any classical era unit can destroy the Gigir because they cannot, attack from a distance. They are not a ranged unit or anything like that. So a unit that comes so late in the ancient era is not going to be good. And these guys are militarists. So you want to make wars, you want to attack a lot of people with them to get those military stars, but the problem is their unique unit comes way too late, and so you are not going to be getting the stars at that point. It's just too late in the ancient era. So you are going to have to be getting those military stars with just the default units. You don't get any real advantage for them, which is a huge handicap. Another reason why the Hittites are so bad is right there in the next culture, which is the Mycenaeans. They are also militarists, but way better than the Hittites, and I'm going to actually put them all the way up there in the OP section. Why are they so much stronger than the Hittites? Well, one of the main reasons is the emblematic unit. The Promakoi is stronger than a default warrior, so just way better than the Gigir of the Hittites that comes much later. The Promakoi come into the game almost immediately. It's very easy to upgrade warriors into Promakoi. You should be getting some gold from curiosities, for example, in the ancient era, and you can use that to get some Promakoi early on, which means the Mycenaeans are pretty much the only culture that can make early rushes really easy in this game. Earlier rushes in the ancient era are not so easy. Usually you have to play defensively and then go in the counter-offensive many times, but with the Mycenaeans it's just a piece of cake. So those military era stars are going to be very easy to pick. You also have minus 20% on unit industry cost as a legacy trait, so this is for the entire game. Plus 25% experience also on created units on city or outpost. Again, that's very nice for early rushes and just for war in general. And because being aggressive in Humankind is so good, that legacy trait is going to come in very handy for the entire game. The emblematic district is also very nice. It's a maker's quarters, so if you put it next to mountains and forests with the right infrastructure, it's going to give you a nice amount of production. And it also raises the stability, which is very useful in the early game because you don't have so many luxuries in the early game. So having an emblematic district that gives you more stability is very good. And so overall it's just a much better garrison. I usually don't like emblematic districts that replace the garrison, but this one is the exception to the rule, especially because of the extra production that the maker quarter will give you and the extra stability. Next we have another very strong culture, and that is the Nubians. They're going to also be up here. They are so strong. The only weakness, if you want to find them one, is that it's not so easy to get the merchant era stars in the ancient era. So if you say because of that reason they should be down here in good, I guess you could make an argument for that. Let me know in the comments if you think that weakness is strong enough to move them one step down. But everything else about the Nubians is just great. The legacy trait is very nice, plus 5 money on luxury resource deposit and another plus 5 on every strategic resource deposit. Very early in the game this is going to give you some very nice amount of extra money. The emblematic unit is basically an improved version of the archer, and the archer is already one of the strongest default units in the game, so a better archer is just always good. There's really nothing bad to say about that. And the emblematic district is also beautiful. The Meroe pyramids, they give you plus 2 industry, plus 2 money, plus 3 money per adjacent maker's quarters, which is really nice because they count as maker quarters themselves, which means you want to have adjacent maker's quarters anyway. So having some extra money for something that you were going to do anyway is beautiful. Overall, a really nice district, a really nice emblematic unit, and a really nice legacy trait. As I said, they are merchant, and getting so much money in the ancient era is not always easy, but I still consider them OP because everything else about them is just so good. Now I'll tell you about my most controversial call here. I'm almost already reading your comments disagreeing with this, letting me know in the comments if you want, if you think this is a bad decision, but I'm going to say that the Olmecs are all the way down here. I'm going to say that they are mediocre, and I know you guys will disagree with me, but before you go there, hear me out. Yes, I know they have the aesthetic affinity trait, and that's very good early on in the game. You can get a lot of extra influence with that, which makes expansion easier. I know, I understand. But the rest of them is just not so great. Plus 3 influence on territory as a legacy trait is not going to be so much, maybe a little bit in the ancient era, but by the time you reach, I don't know, the medieval era, it's going to be irrelevant. You're never going to have so many territories for that to really be a game changer. The emblematic district is not so great. It's a farmer's quarter, gives you a little bit of food and just 1 influence, and a little bit of extra influence if you have more adjacent farmer quarters, but again, you don't want to build a lot of farmer quarters in this game, so that's not something good. And then you have my main problem with the Olmecs, and that is the javelin throwers. The javelin throwers replace the archers. As I said before, the archers are one of the most important, one of the strongest default units in this game. And unfortunately the javelin throwers are just worse. They don't have indirect line of fire, which means that it's much harder to actually be able to attack someone with a javelin thrower. Sure, you get more strength in a forest, but who cares if you cannot attack? Having extra strength is not really important. You want to be able to attack. The archer can always be hiding behind a mountain, so your enemies don't reach them, which means in the classical era, for example, they are still relevant because they attack from a far distance and so they don't die quickly. But these guys cannot attack from a far distance. You cannot hide them behind mountains or anything like that. So they're going to become irrelevant very quickly. They are just worse than the default unit that they are replacing. And that is just very bad. The javelin throwers, maybe the worst unique emblematic unit in the game. I'll let you guys tell me about it in the comments. I think I prefer the default archer. I just prefer having a default archer than having a javelin thrower. That's the sad truth about it. And that's why I think the Olmecs are so bad. The archer is just too important to let him go. Now we have the Phoenicians, and we're going to say that the Phoenicians are mostly situational. If you have a world with small continents, a lot of coastal land, then they're going to be pretty good. Otherwise, not so great. And you're never going to want to pick them in a Pangea map, of course. That's a no-brainer. But so what's the situation with the Phoenicians? Well, the legacy trade is okay. +2 money per traders on city or outpost is quite alright. +1 combat and +1 movement on naval units. It allows for faster exploration later on, so it's not so bad. I personally prefer the extra money per traders. Overall, a decent legacy trade. Not OP, but decent. The emblematic district is a much improved harbor. Gives you +2 money per adjacent coastal water, +2 money per adjacent lake as well, and it counts at both farmer quarter and market quarter. Again, you get some nice extra money from it if you place it well, so it's much better than a normal harbor. And my favorite thing about the Phoenicians is the Byreme. After the buff to the Phoenicians, basically what happened is that the Byreme became a transport. This means at the moment you can build the Byreme, you can already embark your units, meaning you can get to the islands next to your continent much faster than anyone else, which means you are going to be able to easily colonize those islands before your enemies. And that is a nice advantage. I really like the Byreme, the way it's been reworked. And thanks to that, the Phoenicians are now fairly decent. Now we go with the latest of the cultures here, that is the Sumerians. I'm going to say they are mediocre. The Sumerians from the new Together We Rule pack, they have the new Diplomat Affinity trait, which unfortunately is not so strong. To get these stars you need to get leverage on other cultures, and that is not so easy to do. So it's going to be really difficult to get those ancient era stars with these guys. The legacy trait of the Sumerians gives you minus 10% on attached territory cost per remaining city cap count. That is completely 100% useless. You never want to have any remaining city cap count. Why would you ever want that? So you are never going to use that. That's just, I don't know what they were thinking, but you are never going to use it. Minus 25% cost of signing treaties with independent peoples, mostly useless as well. You don't need that reduction cost because those treaties are fairly cheap anyway. Your emblematic unit is anti-cavalry, as I said with the Babylonians. This is not too bad because the AI will maybe build cavalry units in the ancient era, but they have more strength if you have more of them in the same army next to each other, and that is not something you will probably want to do. You will not want to build a lot of anti-cavalry units. The emblematic district is the Aduba. It's not too bad because it gives you some science, which is nice, +2 science, and then another 6 science per adjacent main plaza or administrative center. That is pretty good. Finally, they've been adjusted in the last patch, and now whenever the Aduba is built, you get 5 leverage on each one of the empires that you already know, which is a little bit better because it makes it easier for you to get those diplomat era stars, but it's still not very strong. And it counts as a research quarter, which is fine. Overall, the problem is that it's just too difficult to get those starts, and the legacy trait is just terrible, just a very bad legacy trait. Finally, we go with a culture that is pretty much the definition of situational, the Zhou. If you have a lot of mountains in your starting position, they can be absolutely great. If you have very little or no mountains at all in your starting position, they are absolutely awful. So I have to put them in the middle because they depend entirely on whether you have mountains or not. They have the aesthetic affinity trait, which is always nice in the early game because you can get a lot of early influence. You have a very nice legacy trait, plus 2 stability on district. I really like this one, it can help quite a lot. The emblematic unit is not good. It comes too late, requires too many resources, and it's a melee cavalry unit, which are usually not great. And the emblematic district, as I said before, is a definition of situational. You get plus 5 science per adjacent mountain. If you're lucky, you can sometimes put these guys next to 3 mountain tiles, which give you plus 15 science the moment you build them, which so early in the game can be quite a lot. They also give you extra stability, which is very nice, and plus 1 science just for building them. Overall, you are probably going to end up getting more science with the Zhou if you have a lot of mountains than you would with the Babylonian, which is weird because the Babylonian are in theory the scientific culture, but the Zhou can really give you a lot of science early on if you have enough mountains. And that's it, that's the end of this. As I said, the Zhou definitions, they really change depending on the map. These 2 guys, I would say they are okay. And you could argue that the Sumerians are almost awful. The emblematic districts, I guess, saves them. And I guess a lot of you guys are going to disagree about the Olmecs, maybe some debate about Harappans and Nubians, maybe some of you guys will want to change these places. I don't know, let me know in the comments. Please remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments as well which type of video for Humankind strategy you would like to see next. And as usual, thank you very much for watching.